We're good to go.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the February 22nd meeting of the Ames Community School District Board of Directors. I will call the meeting to order and entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I move we approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Moved by Perez, seconded by Bankin. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. And our first item on the agenda tonight is our COVID-19 update. So I will turn it over to Superintendent Reisner and Dr. Arnold.
Purpose statement.
Oh, purpose statement. Thank you. Hey, Director Linkaitis, would you like to read our purpose statement tonight?
The Ames Community School District commits to equity and access and empowers every individual to reach their full personal and educational potential.
Thank you. And now we will turn it over to Superintendent Reisner and Dr. Arnold.
Thank you, Dr. Arnold. There's been some changes. So tonight, just in terms of the way that there is some of the reporting. And so tonight, Dr. Arnold will give you the COVID update, and then she'll also talk about the CDC reopening schools information that came out. So we'll do both of those back to back. Dr. Arnold, go ahead.
Yeah, and actually I'll do the third one too on vaccines, but I'll pause between just to make sure that anyone can ask questions on the appropriate topic. So on our first slide, this is our COVID positives and quarantines in our school. Today we have 2 students positive for COVID-19 and 12 quarantining due to being identified as close contacts. We have 2 staff positive, 1 quarantining due to close contact, and 3 pending test results. And our graphs show the positives and quarantine since October, and we continue to see a decrease in overall student and staff cases compared to earlier this year. Our next slide shows our Story County metrics. The Story County 14-day average new daily case rate per 100,000 is 16.1. Our case rate has continued to decline a bit since our last meeting, with no noticeable impact of the ISU students back on campus. Our 14-day positivity is 3.4 and our 7-day positivity is 4.0. Now, the state did change how they're reporting data this weekend. Instead of reporting on individuals, now they report on the total number of tests and positives in Story County. So this is, there was a direct impact on our positivity. It decreased it a lot this weekend because there are some times, and that could be, for example, Iowa State athletics getting tested multiple times a week, long-term care, their staff and some residents may still be getting tested, or just people getting repeated tests within the same week. So all of those tests are now in the denominator, which is what's going to pull down that positivity. Some other updates from the state from this weekend. They've removed the school tab on the coronavirus.iowa.gov where the 14-day positives were reported. The 14-day positivities are reported. And that is still, the data is still accessible on their regular case count page, but there isn't a separate school page anymore. On the graphs below, you'll notice I removed the yellow and orange bands from our chart since we no longer have those options as we discussed at last meeting. And so I've just removed those bands from this data. And you'll see on the average case rate for the school year, you'll see the lines continue for a little bit until we had ended that. And then the next slide is our internal school metrics. As of today, our 5-day student absence rates are at the high school 1.28, middle school 0.85, and elementary is at 0.94, and which is in that green risk band. 5-day staff absence rates 2.24, middle school at 4.83, and elementary at 4.33, also in the green risk band for all those levels. Graphs below show the student and staff 5-day absence rates for the past month. And this is another area where I have removed those yellow and orange bands Those formatting change and some other small formatting changes will show up on our dashboard on the website tomorrow morning. I've added positivity in our historical and daily county data, just since that may be an indicator that we would have to use if we were to have a spike or something and end up applying to go remote. And the next slide actually, I think, brings us into the next piece of the agenda. So I'll pause here to see if there are any questions on the local conditions before we move into the next topic. I feel like that is adequate wait time, so I'm going to keep going. So this next slide is the CDC indicators and thresholds for community transmission of COVID-19. This is what we talked about at the last meeting. CDC did finally release their guidance for COVID-19 and for schools, and what they've transitioned a little bit on this strategy where from low to high transmission. The thing about this is we are unable to adopt these metrics due to our state regulations requiring us to offer a full-time school option. Additionally, we have the guidance from IDPH, Department of Ed, and the governor that doesn't allow us to move into a remote schooling option until our positivity is greater than 15% when we meet certain absence markers, or greater than 20%. But I did want to share this with you. There is something out there now. Unfortunately, it's just something because of our state that we cannot really adopt and still meet our regulations that we're required to do. Questions on this?
So I'm just out of curiosity, I can see that, so our 7-day positivity, you reported at 4%. So we would be in the low transmission blue based on positivity, but not by total new cases per 100,000.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And that's not, just to point out, very good question there. That total new cases is not the case count average that we've been reporting. That is literally the addition of the total new cases over the past 7 days, which we would probably, I think, still be somewhere between the orange and the red. According to that metric, according to the CDC, you would go to the higher level. So
thank you. And I appreciate you pointing that out, because I have had people ask that question, and it is total. There is no word average in there. So thank you.
Yes. And it's a 7-day versus we had looked at the 14-day. So that also that confuses it a little bit too. All right, then I'll move on to vaccines. The good news and the highlight of the presentation, I think. So I wanted to share where we're at so far. We've held 3 vaccination clinics and another one scheduled for tomorrow. So far, 354 staff have received their first dose, which represents a little over 53% of the 672 people we have registered to receive it through us. There's the breakdown by the dates on the 5th, the 12th, and the 19th, how many we vaccinated at each clinic. The clinic tomorrow, we're going to be able to give 150 doses. We had an opportunity because other schools did not want to have to bring their staff in or offer that during spring break. But I found that there were doses out there that were willing to be given, and I wanted to make sure that we could offer whatever we could offer. So we did have people sign up for that clinic. That, after completion of tomorrow, will bring us to 75% overall of our first doses. Our second dose clinics start this Friday, and also then on the 5th and the 12th. They're every 3 weeks because we did get Pfizer. It does appear that we're going to continue to have Pfizer. That helps us not switch back and forth just from a timing perspective and making sure we can schedule those clinics. As far as where we are overall, with that, you'll see that group 1 is 100% complete with their first dose. Group 2, 91% have received their first dose. Group 3, 66% have, and an additional 21% will complete tomorrow their first dose. 5% of group 4 has their first dose, but that's going to go up to 63% after tomorrow. And we are just starting into group 5. And I really hope to be done with offering both doses to staff that are interested in the next 5 to 6 weeks. just with the timing and scheduling with Story County Public Health, we can only we can offer the location and bring in the people, but we need the vaccine. And so that's what we partner with Story County Public Health, and they are the ones also who administer it. So that is it as far as vaccines. Anything I can answer from that perspective?
No, I'm muted. I don't have any questions. I just want to thank you so much for the vaccine update. I mean, just looking at these numbers gives me a huge sigh of relief. Thank you so much for coordinating this, and to the staff who were willing to take the vaccine. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much.
There are lots of smiles and cheers during the clinic. It's actually kind of a fun place to be. Number one, you get to see people and, you know, converse with them from a safe social distance, but also people are very happy to be there. And so it's a great place to be. Okay, then here ends my presentation.
All right. Are there any other questions on the COVID-19 update? And then we will take any public comments on the COVID-19 update. And I will go ahead and read our statement on public forum. Residents of the district, students attending the district, parents or guardians of students attending the district, and district staff members may address the board about any topic relevant to the district, whether on the current agenda or not. Those who wish to speak must sign up at the beginning of the meeting. Speaker participation is limited to 3 minutes once per item. The views and opinions of citizens addressing the board do not necessarily reflect those of the board, district administration, or staff. Speakers are to remember that Iowa law prohibits the board from discussing specific employees, students, or their performance. Student speakers will state their name and school. Others will state their name and address. Okay, and do we have any public comments on the COVID-19 update? Okay, I do not see any, so we will move on to our discussion items. Our first item is our board committee update. And I will go ahead and speak for the policy committee just to say that the policies we discussed are under policies for discussion, and I don't have any other update except that we will have another meeting this Thursday. I have equity and policy this week, so this Thursday at noon. Any other committees have updates?
For the Audit and Budget Oversight Committee, we met, the minutes are still forthcoming, but what we talked about is what Chris is going to go over with our funding for next year. So that'll be covered very shortly.
Thank you. All right, if there aren't
just a quick update from the Teaching and Learning Committee. We are have a meeting scheduled March 10th at 3:30 virtually.
Thank you. Okay, we will go ahead and go on to the 2021-2022 funding, and I will turn it over to Chris Stensland.
Good evening, board. I'm going to apologize right up front. About 10 o'clock this morning, I started getting a horrible sore throat, and I've been sucking on cough drops here, so hopefully I can make it through this. I think that's the hazard of having grandkids over the weekend. We do have some firmer numbers on school funding for next year. So the Budget and Audit Committee wanted me to just review those with you. Eric, if you could pull up the attachment, that would help, I think. So the first is something that probably looks very familiar to you. It's the regular allowable growth summary that just kind of shows you where we are. We had talked about in the fall that our enrollment count for budget purposes went down about 126 students. The legislature did pass, and the governor has signed, I believe, 2.4% state supplemental aid. So that will give us an increase of $169 per student. So our regular new program dollars actually decreased by $163,667. But if you recall, the last time we spoke, there's a mechanism within the state formula that is called a budget guarantee that guarantees that any school district will receive at least 101% of the prior year regular program dollars. And when I presented the information in the fall, if we'd gotten zero, that budget guarantee would be 1.2 million. With the 2.4%, that budget guarantee is 482,000. That is all 100% property taxes, but that does bring us up to 101% of the prior year regular program dollars. Now that doesn't roll forward. So if we would have a decrease in students next year, then it's 101% of the 31,706,000 for the next year. So you would lose a little bit if we didn't regain those students. I just wanted to make sure that we don't continually get that 101% of the prior year or that base year. I remember in the fall, I told you that we needed over 3.9% for it to make any difference on new funding. So regardless of whether it was 0% or 2.4 or 3.9, the new money is still the same. We also had a loss from open enrollment. We had more students open enroll out, which means of those 4,351 students that we counted, we're going to be sending more money out to other school districts. And we had less open enroll in, which means that we're going to have other districts send us less money. The combination of those two is a loss of $719,000 or just under 720, which makes our net new money negative 397,000. Any questions on this page? Okay, if you go to the next page, Eric. So I just rolled our new money forward with both the new regular program dollars and then that loss from open enrollment. I put in an estimate for salary and benefit increases, which would bring us to net new money after salaries and benefits of a negative 1,100,000 or just under $1,200,000. We did have 7 retirements, and if we fill all those positions, we save about $20,000 a piece on those. So that's a savings of 140. So that would leave us net new funds of negative $1,057,000. Superintendent Reisner and the administration have been working on identifying budget modifications. And once we have final numbers on those, she'll bring those forward. But at this point, nothing's final on those. But I didn't want you to think that this is where we stopped. This is a continual work in progress. And Superintendent Reisner can jump in if she has something to add.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So just how the process works. We look first at the district level and identify anywhere that we might be able to make cuts. That my goal is always to have the least, and my team shares the goal as well, to have the least impact possible at the classroom level. So we look at the district level first, and then we will be meeting, and the meetings have already started with the building principals to identify areas within their buildings where we could identify some cuts. So that's just how that process works. And it's kind of a lengthy one, and we're just right at the beginning point. We've done some work anticipating from a district standpoint that this would be the situation that we would most likely be in. So I feel like at a district level, we've identified cuts, and now we're looking at that building level.
Superintendent Reisner, and Chris, if I can just be clear. So you're looking at a shortfall of basically of $1 million. And so you're starting the process of figuring out how you're going to cut $11 million, or excuse me, $1 million. Is that right?
Yes. Not 11 million.
Yeah, thank God. Yes, that would be correct. and I explained this to the Budget and Audit Committee, but I think it's very good for you to understand and for our public to understand. There's two different things between cash and the ability to spend that cash. We have the ability to get cash. We're a property-rich district. We can levy cash to get cash, but we have to have authority within the formula to spend it. So unfortunately, and we kind of always ride that line, we've got like the bare minimum of unspent balance, and unspent balance is one time. So once it's gone, it's gone. So we can't just say because we have money in the bank that we don't have to make cuts because we've got the money in the bank. We don't have the spending authority to go with it. And if those of you that were around a couple years ago remember all of the brouhaha with Davenport schools, that's exactly what happened with them. They spent the cash they had in the bank but didn't have spending authority. So that's why when we start looking at cuts, that's why it's because of the spending authority. And the thought in the formula and why they do that is to prevent property-rich districts from being able to provide more of an education to its students than a property-poor district. You can argue that the formula is not well funded or adequately funded. I would argue that all day long. I don't think we're adequately funded, but the formula itself is equitable and it treats all students, regular ed students, the same across the district. And then it layers on things for special ed and at-risk and ELL and so forth for those extra services that are needed. So I'm glad you asked that, Director Benkin, because that's an important distinction to make.
I did have a follow-up question, and it's on the slide before. You asked if there were any questions before you moved, but then I couldn't quick enough. And so the line, you know, where you talk about the budget guarantee that comes from property taxes. So is that translating into an increase in people's property taxes? Can you help me understand that line a little better, please?
I will if we can go to the next slide after the one we were just on. There we go. Okay, so and before I'm going to answer your question, but I was starting to say that there is one piece of funding that is still in legislation at the state. They had talked about a one-time supplemental amount which would actually come to us in fiscal year 21 to help offset some of COVID expenditures and help with next year's budget. Unfortunately, the way they've drafted that one right now, it is going to be distributed based on the number of days that school districts were 100% in attendance for students who selected on site. So if you were in 100%, you're going to get so much per day. If you were in hybrid, you're going to get half of that amount per day. I have no idea how much that's going to generate for us, so I can't put that onto my numbers, but that is one piece that they are still kind of hashing out at the state. The Senate had in their bill just a plain $65 per student supplement for every student in the state, with the exception of one school district. But the House version is based on the number of 100% in attendance days. Okay, so as far as property taxes, we did have a good growth in our valuation. They went up around just under 6%. You can see the valuations at the top. I have ran everything through the funding formula and determined what our property tax rate was going to be. We are going, the max on cash reserve for us is $4,680,000, and I'm proposing that we levy $4,550,000. We had a large balance in our management fund several years ago. A very large amount was levied in the management fund, and I've been trying to whittle that balance down. And we're now down to a reasonable carryover for cash flow purposes within that. So I'm proposing that we levy 1.1 million. I know it looks like 1,096,000, but that's because of the way the utility rebate works. But $1.1 million in the management fund. Our annual expenditures in the management fund are about 1.2 million. So we're back to levying in management to match our expenditures for a year. We, of course, will max out our regular and voted PEPL at 33 cents and $1.34 effectively. And then the number that we needed to come up with then is for debt service to try to keep that tax rate at $14.34. Because of our valuation increase and because of the 2.4% not having as much on property tax for that budget guarantee, we were considerably under that $14.34. So I have been working with Tim Oswald and Ron Peeler about another pre-levy on our 2019 bonds. And we are proposing to levy $2.5 million to pre-fund some of our 2019 bonds so that when they become callable, the money's sitting in the bank to call them. And that will keep the tax rate at $14.34. So the long answer to what should have been a very short answer to you, Director Benkin, is the tax rate is going to stay the same. Eric, if you could go to the next page, I do want to explain why we want, I know this is really, really small, but the reason that we want to keep that tax rate at $14.34, if you notice, especially in the January 21 bonds that we just issued, and even further down in the 2019 bonds, you'll see those principal payments start going up significantly. So we don't want to get in a situation where we're yo-yoing on the tax rate. So we're pre-levying some of the 2019 bonds to keep that tax rate at $14.34 so that when those bigger bond payments hit, that we don't have that yo-yoing effect. And then if you'll go to my last page, Eric. So, the rule of thumb is that you tax people today for today's service and you don't tax people for future services, which is kind of what happened with our management levy a few years ago. But there is a real benefit to the taxpayers in this particular instance, in that by pre-levying on those bonds that would be due normally in 2038 and 2039, they become callable in 2030, which means we can pay them at that point. By having it in the bank, we avoid $741,000 of interest by doing that. So that is a direct savings to our taxpayers. If you think of your mortgage, if you paid your mortgage early and how much interest you'd save. So I just wanted to point that out. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Superintendent Reisner, it was mentioned a little bit in our committee meeting, but can you lay out for the board in terms of, in the community, in terms of these budget modifications, how that will be brought to the board, maybe the timing on it?
Yes. Sorry, I apologize. We are in the initial phases of working with the building principals to identify those building level areas that we could look to have some savings. And then within, Chris, date wise, I don't remember what you and I talked about, and I don't have the calendar in front of me. I can't be exact, but we did talk about, depending on how those look, the potential of doing a community forum, if there's going to be some impacts that we would want to lay out for parents and community. If there aren't those cuts that are going to be noticeable at the classroom level, it may just be a work session with the board. So it could be one of two ways. It could be through a community forum and a board work session, or a board work session. Either way, we'll have a board work session prior to bringing it for approval.
So timing, and I should have mentioned that I kind of lied at the last board meeting and said there wouldn't be another bondish item on an agenda. There will be one on the 8th for the pre-funding. So hopefully that will be the last bond item for the year. We would have the formal certified budget proposed and ready to go by the second meeting in March, with certification or adoption on the 12th of April. You've heard me say many, many times that the budget does not change. The budget numbers will not change unless they do additional funding that we don't know about at this point. How you reallocate resources within that budget may change, but the budget itself does not change. What we propose, or what superintendent proposes for modifications, doesn't affect the budget at all. It just keeps us within that budget. There's a couple of big, in my opinion, a couple of big unknowns. One is this one-time funding they were talking about and how much of that we might get. The other would be a third round of stimulus funds or ESSER funds. If we were to get, if they would pass this third round of the, whatever they're calling it, the Recovery Act, and we got another large portion of the ESSER funds, which they're already starting to call ESSER 3, we may at that time want to have a conversation about whether we use our ESSER, some of our ESSER funds to provide a stopgap in hopes that students would return, that the loss in students was because of the pandemic. I told the committee that business managers have a love-hate relationship with one-time money. We love it when we get it, and it keeps us from having cuts, but the problem is the next year, if the circumstances doesn't change, you've relied on one-time money, so you have to make the cuts the following year. And in the following year, you might actually have new money, but if you haven't cut what you needed the year before, you're still out of balance with spending authority. So that's a really big decision to make, which would, I think, impact the timing of when budget modifications would be presented to the board. But they would not, other than if there were notification for staff reductions that had to go out, which I'm not saying there is, but if that would be the timing, those have to be out for certified staff by April 30th. So that's really where you back up from, is that April 30th deadline.
And Chris, in the event, because so much of this is impacted by the number of students we have open enrolling out compared to those who are open enrolling in, if we were to have that increase by next fall count, you can go to school budget review, SBRC, right? If you needed to make some changes.
Are you talking if we have a large increase in
Yes.
enrollment next fall?
Right.
Yes, we get on-time spending authority, which again is what we care about. We've got the cash, so we won't have a cash flow problem in the fall. So they give us spending authority in real time because obviously the funding, the ongoing funding is a year behind.
Right.
So whatever we count next fall is for the 22-23 budget. But we can apply, it's an automatic, it's just a click of a button that I have to do saying we had this many students increase and we get spending authority.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Chris, I don't intend for you to repeat yourself, but I just have a quick clarification that I need. So basically, so our budget is due April 15th, right? So like you said, the budget doesn't change, but the modifications is what it's gonna, that allows the flexibility. So the last day for those modifications, am I correct to assume that it's April 30th? Is that correct, or am I wrong?
Only if you're reducing certified staff.
Okay. Okay, so for planning purposes.
Employees that are licensed under the BOEE that are not administrators. So I always say certified staff because that's teachers, counselors, nurses, and so forth. So.
But for, let's see, curriculum or anything in that sense, we could come to that date and let's say July still be talking about this, about the modifications, or is that?
In theory, as long as you don't spend it before then. So in other words, hear me when I say I'm using examples and nothing that, but let's say that the board wanted to consider cutting the curriculum budget, the textbook budget. You could still be talking about that in July as long as we didn't on July 1st order all new textbooks. Does that make sense?
But
Absolutely, totally.
Director Colton, to your point, the April 30th date is for staff reductions of certified staff. So yes, you're right in that this is a unique year because we don't know if we're getting those ESSER funds. We don't know. And so there is the chance that we are going to hold on and not, look at some of those deeper cuts that we might have made if we weren't in the situation where there was the potential for more money. So it's kind of one we have to really pay attention to what we're hearing from our UEN, from our legislators, and keep tabs on it so that we try and stay ahead of that, because we don't want to be in a situation where we make cuts too deep and we lose staff that we can't regain. So we want to make sure that we're being really mindful as we go into the process and making cuts as far away from the classroom level as we possibly can, while we're keeping our pace, hoping that there's some relief.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board for Chris on the school funding? All right, and then do we have any public comments on the school funding item? I am having a hard time pulling up it doesn't look like I see any hands raised. If I didn't say it before, if you do have a comment, you can just raise your hand and you'll be given permission to speak. Okay, I don't see any comments, so we will go ahead and move on to the 2021-22 school calendar. And Superintendent Reisner.
Thank you. So a little later than normal as we bring this forward. Usually we try to get it to you in December or January, but we were still making changes to this year's calendar. So Dr. Hawkins, would you talk about the changes? There's not a lot of changes to the calendar for next year, but there's a couple to highlight.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'd first like to just start with a review of process, right? So we began with a calendar pretty similar to the 1920 calendar. It's been processed by our teachers union and by our administrative team. We collected feedback from both of those groups in order to see what adjustments needed to be made. A primary point of conversation with both groups was around parent-teacher conferences. As you may recall from the beginning of this year, we talked about a change to our approach to conferencing this year, and then trying to determine whether or not that was something that worked well for our students and staff, and to see whether or not we wanted to incorporate that in future years. There is some interest both on teachers and administrators' parts in order to continue some conferencing early in the semester and look a little bit differently at the way we use conference time during the semester. And so you may see on the calendar that's brought to you tonight, there are still two dates. One of them is the Wednesday before Thanksgiving break. Let me look here. I believe that's November 26th. And that's still identified as a day that would be flexed in order to give staff time for 8 hours of conference expectation outside of their contracted time. However, we've been really agreed, what is that going to look like? How many hours are going to be right at the beginning of the year? How many hours? Well, there's been general agreement that we're not going to schedule it the way we have in the past, right? Not just 3 to 4 nights right before that flex day, but rather some flexible scheduling. There's been some conversation about that looking a little bit different between elementary, middle, and high school. But again, general agreement that 8 hours of time will be committed to, and then that flex day will be given there. And then a second one, second semester, the Friday before spring break. Other than that, the only other change that's been discussed has been around professional development. The secondary schools have desire to return to the full day professional development model that they used prior to this year. The elementary is still in a little bit of conversation because there were some different suggestions between that union group and the administrator group about how to best schedule that time. But we'll still be scheduling those. As you may know, as a board, the state code requires a minimum of 36 hours of professional development time be scheduled during the school year. So we'll be still a little bit of conversation to figure out exactly what those 36 hours or more are going to look like for our elementary level. Other than that, spring break is scheduled at a similar time to other years. Start date is scheduled pretty similarly. A little bit shorter winter break than typical, and last day of students proposed is June 1st. We have already worked with Hilton Coliseum to secure it for commencement ceremony on May 29th. I don't know if there's any other questions about process or any specific things to the calendar. I'd be happy to answer them if there are.
So Dr. Hawkins, when you were talking about the elementary level professional development, so would this be moving, let's see, this year we've had elementary has gone the full day every day. Would it be back to the Wednesdays early outs, or is that still in the works?
That's a great question. That's exactly what we're talking about. Yes.
Okay.
So there was a proposal of going back to the Wednesday early outs. Yep. That's
Okay.
Correct. And there was also some conversation, particularly from our teachers, that said, we've talked to our secondary colleagues, and we're hearing how valuable those full day professional development sessions are that they're having. And we'd like to at least engage in a little bit more conversation about the opportunity for elementaries to be in a full day model similar to the secondaries. And so our elementary principals have agreed to engage in some conversation and try to figure that out. And that's why you don't see anything committed to that on the calendar at this point, because there's still some conversation to figure out what model might be best to meet teacher and administrators' needs around professional development.
And
Okay.
I think the one thing
Thank
that we continue to have conversation around with that elementary model being a full day model, it does create difficulty for childcare in our community. And so that is one of the things when we surveyed the public, when the high school and middle school went to this model, there was a lot of, I don't know if a lot, but there was a significant number of families that were concerned about daycare options for a full day. And so that is something that we want to be really mindful of as we move forward.
Well, and that was that one of the reasons I asked the question about the early out on Wednesdays is for that very reason, for the childcare. I know families work many months in advance in figuring out their plans for after school care. So that's so we will wait and see on Wednesday early outs. That's the message I'm hearing. So would you anticipate that we may, would we approve? Would this be up for approval next Wednesday? No, not next Wednesday, at the next meeting.
No,
sorry,
it won't be.
Yeah. At a Wednesday early out. No. So this would be up for approval in its current shape or form, but then we would have to alter it if you were to make a different decision with those elementary days.
My goal, quite frankly, is to be able to have some of those conversations before bringing it for our next board meeting.
Okay.
I know it's an important conversation for our community, and I know our board is going to be interested to know that answer, not approving a calendar to then potentially do something after approval. So my goal would be to have those conversations prior to, and as you probably are well aware as a board, right, our first opportunity to share is tonight. This actually does require a public hearing before it would get approved then. So my goal would be to answer those questions, bring forward a calendar that could go to a public hearing, and then seek your approval.
And I appreciate that, because that's why I just wanted to make sure as we could clarify that for the community. So thank you for answering all my questions.
Not a problem. Maybe one other thing that I think is just important, and maybe it's just me that's important for it to point out, but as the community maybe has been used to, that January date next year would be January 17th, has often been a day where students don't report, but staff do for professional development. That's Martin Luther King Jr. day. And just like this year, we're proposing that all students and staff have that day off in honor of the holiday.
Dr. Hawkins, I have a question. So this year, I think it's just been a different year. And so right now, our secondary students are in a 4-day schedule. Is there any, and there's a reason for that, is there any conversation that the reason that the students are in a 4-day-a-week schedule would persist into the next academic year? And if that's the case, is there an alternative schedule, or just kind of what are you thinking in that regard?
Thank you. I appreciate the question. To be direct, no, there has not been conversation about continuing a 4-day model into next year. I don't know if that's naive hopefulness that we will not be continuing to need to ask our secondary teachers to teach both face-to-face and remote students as we come into next fall. I think maybe I'll be honest with you, I'm placing my hope in some of the vaccine updates that Dr. Arnold gave earlier in our presentation. But again, to be direct, no, there has not been conversation about a 4-day model for next year.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board on the calendar? Okay, then we will open it up for comments from the public on our 2021-22 school calendar. And it looks like we have a hand raised. Kendra, you have been given permission to speak. If you want to just go ahead and unmute your microphone. It looks like you're muted still. Okay, Kendra, I'm not sure if you're having technical difficulty. We do have our public forum, so if you still would like to comment, you'll be able to do so in the public forum. For now, we will go ahead and move on to our policies for discussion. And we have several policies tonight. Are we going to have, Kristen Johnson, are you planning to cover these, or would you like me to?
I'm happy to do it unless you want to do it.
That would be, I am going to go ahead and let you do that.
First, I want to just point out that I put a whole bunch of all of the 300 series that had not been reviewed more recently together, because there were a lot of picking from some and putting into others and going back and forth. And so I just thought it'd be a lot easier to take the comparison of the ISB policies with ours, do it all at once and throw them at you at once. So here you go. The first one is 302.1, and that would be a new policy for Ames. It's recommended policy from IASB. And it's simply a general statement of that you would have, our district will have, the board would hire a superintendent, a general statement of qualifications, and a statement of non-discrimination. Do you want me to just kind of pause after each one, and then if there are any questions, and then just move on?
Sure, that seems like a good plan.
Okay. No questions? Is it possible, JD, to put them on the screen when we go through them? Okay, so there's 302.1, just the general new policy. The board will employ a superintendent. The second paragraph is the standard non-discrimination, partly that, and also that, we want a qualified superintendent. And then the final one is that the board will consider the school district's educational philosophy, financial situation, etc. Okay. Yes.
Are all of these ISB recommended?
Yes.
So I guess one question I have is if there are any of them where there's wording that is different from ISB recommendation, maybe point that out. But if there's not, you know.
Okay, I'll try to remember.
I agree. I think we, rather than going through each one, because I'm sure the board has read them already and they are the model policies from IASB. So just if we can just note if there was any significant change from the ISB. Sometimes we do some grammar work on it and clean up grammar, but that wouldn't change really anything.
Okay. So 302. Do you want me to just talk about it? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Director.
Just to interject for the board, you know, I think one of the things I actually enjoy about the policy committee is we give these policies a pretty thorough beating before they're allowed to pass through to come to the board. And so one of the things that I think the people who serve on the committee are also really good about is bringing certain things to your attention that are either controversial or bit major changes or need to be like, oh, people really need to be aware of this. And I don't recall in this set that there was anything like that. Sabrina, do you remember? I felt like this was pretty standard stuff.
There was, yep. I think as I'm looking back through my notes, there was maybe just 1 or 2 wording changes in the whole 300 series. Does that sound right to you, Kristen?
Yes, and we did hold back 303.6.
Yeah, that one didn't make it. It didn't make it through.
Didn't make the cut.
So that one's not here, and that would be the only one that really had substantial discussion and substantial change to it. I think all the other ones, there may have been a comma or, you know, something very, very minor. Otherwise, they are the ISB recommended policies.
Are they all new to the district?
No, they are not all new. I can tell you which ones are. 302.4 is new. 302.5 is based, it's not new, but it's like our old one, but it modifies it, rewords it, changes it around. It takes some of it to put it into the administrative rules instead of in the policy. 303.1 is not new, it's just more general. 303.2 is a new policy. 303.2A, we are recommending to eliminate, to remove. That's the current, I should say, that's Ames policy 303.2A. We are recommended to eliminate it. There is no IASB 303.2A. 303.3 is new. 303.4 is reworded. 303.7 is new. 305 is new. 306 is new. 307 is new.
One of the things, we're always trying to refine this process. And one of the things that what we could do, board members, we could note on there if it's a new policy. So next to the policy, we could list new to bring your attention to it if it's new moving forward.
So does anyone have, were there any questions on any specific policies that people wanted to bring up?
I'm wondering about 307. If we can bring that one up. This is one of the new ones, right? We don't have anything comparable to it.
Correct.
And this is an ISB.
Yes, it's IASB recommended, yes. We had a bit of discussion about this one in our policy committee.
Okay, yeah, I just, the days, I'm interested in that, the second paragraph when we talk about the days, like if this doesn't happen, then this happened and things they're brought up to the board. So I'm not sure if I'm following the train of thought on this one. So maybe if you can kind of indulge me, like what kind of conversations you had about it, just because I'm wondering when will we bring something, if we get an email and we will bring it back to the board? I don't know, that just didn't seem like it made sense.
So the way that I read this, and I'm sorry, Kristen, were you gonna
No, go ahead.
Okay, is, this is really all about following the proper channels to resolve issues at the lowest level possible. And that was kind of what our conversation centered around, on giving our building principals the opportunity to resolve issues. And if they don't, giving the superintendent the opportunity to resolve issues, so that we make sure that we're empowering people to manage their buildings and to address issues at their buildings. And then just kind of going through that chain of command. If something's not resolved, if someone doesn't get a resolution, they can bring it to the superintendent. If they still don't feel it's resolved, they can request to put it on the board agenda. And then the board could decide whether or not to put that on the agenda. Does that make sense? Did I cover that correctly, Kristen?
Yes.
And so I think this is a really important policy, and that was something we talked a lot about, of making sure that people are aware of the chain of communication, and giving people the opportunity that are in our leadership positions to resolve those issues.
Superintendent Reisner, I can't remember, was the number scripted by IASB, or did you, I know we talked about the numbers, because that was one thing that stood out to me as I feel like I asked, are you all feeling comfortable with the numbers that are placed in terms of the 3 school days? And then I believe it's 5 school days. I can't remember if you chose the number of days or IASB suggests it, but
it's IASB's policy.
Yeah. It was a suggestion, but they also said if you want different days, you can use different days. But these are the number of days IASB suggested.
Yeah. But we did talk about if you all were comfortable with that number of days. So yeah.
I think the important thing is there's Iowa code around just how complaints can be filed against employees and things. So this is a policy really to protect, I think, the district and the board from getting into a situation where there's the potential for grievances. And
we've had this conversation before with the board. Last year, I recall we talked about the board being a high level, being at a high level in terms of not getting in too much into the weeds in personnel matters involving student conduct and so forth, and maintaining that that needed. You need to be able to maintain your disinterest, your neutrality as a board, if something should ever come to the board as a result of something that was brought to you. So to start it through the channels that we have indicated here is going to hopefully not only resolve any kind of matter at the earliest possible time, but also maintain the board's neutrality in case it doesn't get resolved.
What is the 300 series?
With that?
The policies in the 300 series, because thinking back to it, yeah, the referenced one here, 401.4, has an even more complete description in this, right? That has the chain of command and all of that. What do you remember offhand? What's the 300 series about? What's the general context for this one?
Administration.
Okay, so it's similar to what Superintendent Reisner said, where it's about the Iowa Code and the administration of complaints and how they come up to make sure we stay compliant with that code. That sounds right. Okay.
I think we also talked about this as an extension of our equity work. This was a policy that was really missing from our policies, but it was also an extension of our equity work, because I think what we talked about was this would really ensure that people with access to board members weren't able to have their issues receive attention to the exclusion of people who frankly don't have access to board members. And so it was really just ensuring the fairness that everybody in our district is obligated to receive, while also making sure we don't inadvertently violate the law. So I appreciate it being brought forward.
I guess the thing that caught my attention was the 5 school days. It seemed like a lot, but I guess if that's what the committee discussed, that was a reasonable number, that's okay. And the part that I'm kind of, and I guess if it's ISB, that's just kind of how they worded, but it is within the board's discretion whether to hear the concern. I'm not sure what that means. Is that I guess I'm not sure what that means. So I'm struggling with that bit.
Well,
Director Cole, concern. I was literally like, what does that mean? Because I felt like a lot of, if the resolve had not been, if the concern hadn't been resolved by now, you know, by the time that it's supposed to, would it be appropriate to bring what's probably a student specific or a staff specific concern to the board table? So I shared that concern.
One thing I would point out is that if there is a process for addressing that particular concern, then that process is the process that will be followed. So this would apply to issues that don't already have a process for being addressed.
So like,
And
a student complaint or a parent concern, for example, there's not a trap in this language that says, well, if they don't bring it to the superintendent within 3 days, they're out of luck. There's an entirely different policy for that lays out how long they have to bring that and what that is. And
yes.
Correct. Yes.
because that language seemed a little odd too, but I chalked it up to, I think the other policies have more complete language around them.
Correct.
So it's kind of maybe a way to address concerns that aren't covered by policies and processes that already exist, but for maintaining a channel of problem solving and resolution that applies across the board, district-wide.
Are there any other questions on this or any of the other policies? Okay. And then we will take any public comments on the policies for discussion. And so if you have a comment, you may raise your hand. Okay, I don't see any, so we will go ahead and open our public forum. So anyone who is wishing to speak as part of the public forum, please raise your hand and you'll be given permission to speak. And just as a reminder, please remember to state your name and address. Okay, I don't see any hands raised, so we can move on to our consent items. And do I have a motion?
I move approval of the consent items.
Second.
Okay. Moved by Beerbaum, seconded by Colton, and Superintendent Reisner.
Gifts to the district, Core Foundations, Woodworking with a Purpose, Ames Town and Country Kiwanis, Dan Wooden Excellence in Education Award, Willard and Janet Opadil, Northminster Presbyterian Church, Ames Noon Kiwanis, Lutheran Church of Hope, Hy-Vee Fuel Your School Sweepstakes, Charlie and Angela Boker, and Deb Ketchum.
Thank you. So it has been moved by Beerbaum, seconded by Colton to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. All right. Moving on to our action items, we have our policies for action. And do I have a motion?
I move the board approve the policy as presented.
Second.
Moved by Bankin, seconded by Franzen. Discussion. Okay. Seeing none, it's been moved by Bankin, seconded by Franzen. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. Fiscal year 22 budget guarantee resolution.
I move the Board of Directors of the Ames Community School District levy property taxes for fiscal year 2021 to 2022 for the regular program budget adjustment as allowed under Iowa Code Section 2257.14.
Second.
Moved by Perez, seconded by Linkaitis. Discussion.
So this would be a first for the board because it's the first since I've been here. When you are on the budget guarantee, there is a requirement within the statute for the board to pass a resolution that states they're aware that they're levying those property taxes, and for that resolution to be filed with the Department of Management. So, and since I haven't done one of these in over 10 years, I was paranoid I was going to forget it. It's not specific to amount, so it can be done at any time. So I put it on the agenda for this evening.
Are there any questions from the board? Okay, it has been moved by Perez, seconded by Linkaitis, and we will have a roll call vote on this one. And I will go in alphabetical order. Director Bankin.
Aye.
Director Beerbaum.
Aye.
Director Colton.
Aye.
Director Franzen.
Aye.
Director Linkaitis.
Aye.
Director Perez.
Aye.
Director Shields Cook, aye. Passes 7-0. New Ames High project change orders.
I move the board approve the change orders for the new Ames High School project as presented.
Moved by Linkaitis, seconded by Beerbaum. Discussion. Okay, seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. Items from the board.
I just have two quick things. I'd like to thank the district for continuing to support the NAACP, particularly the NAACP Freedom Fund banquet that we just had last week. I want to thank the district for allowing at least some of the board members and other people the opportunity to be able to attend that event and to support the organization. And secondly, I wanted to just acknowledge that I was invited in my other capacities, albeit my professional capacity, not my board capacity, to speak at the Black History and Cultural Fair at the high school this Friday. I'll be giving a talk on the school to prison pipeline. So I know that's something that we've talked about a lot. So I'll be doing that with my other hat on Friday.
Thank you. Any other items from the board?
One thing I wanted to bring up that I did not mention during the committee update and should have, because I think this is the first meeting after it. Time flies. The facilities committee, we discussed having a tour of the high school and inviting all the board members to that. So you probably saw an invite for that, or you will. Highly encourage people to come to that so we can all see how that project's going.
All right, I don't see anyone else, so we will move on to items from the superintendent.
Thank you. Just a few. The first one I wanted to talk about was the weather-related remote learning days. And if Eric, can you click on that? Thank you. And so if you remember, the governor this year allowed us to do remote learning days on days that there was inclement weather. So we have been able to take advantage of that opportunity. And I wanted to remind the board, the reason for doing that is we did start later than anticipated this year. So it is putting us out a little later than normal. So our last day of school is June 10th, which is much later than we normally get out. So tacking days on to the end of the year, I know is problematic for families. And then in addition to that, there's been a couple questions why we couldn't do late starts, and we had made that decision not to do late starts. If you remember, because we are right at our instructional hour. So that 1080 number, we are right at that, not much flexibility. So if we were to do a couple hour late start, we have to make up those hours at the end of the year. So that is just the reminder for the board. I know that you could be getting questions. I'm not sure you are, but just as a reminder, that was the reasoning behind that. Is there any questions on that or clarification?
Does this continue into next year?
As far as we know, no. We haven't heard that it does. And next year, we are very hopeful that we'll be back to a normal routine and normal calendar and back to that buffer that we have, and normally we have had in the past, that buffer.
Let's just make sure we don't have any more negative 30 days for the rest of the year. I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah, that was, I'm with you, Director Beerbaum. I'm with you on that. The next item, the House Oversight Committee meeting. We were invited, as most of you know, to present in front of the House Oversight regarding our Black Lives Matter Week of Student Action. And that meeting was going to happen tomorrow, but we have requested to have that meeting moved to a different date so that we could have some additional time to prepare and answer the questions that the committee might have. And so that meeting will be scheduled the week of March 8th. From my understanding, a date has not been set yet. I haven't received the exact date that that'll happen. As soon as I do, I'll let the board know on that. But I wanted to make sure that you were aware that we had been invited, and this that we had pushed that back a little bit to allow for more time. Attending on behalf of the district with myself will be Director of Equity Anthony, Monique, since Monique has been the chair of our Equity Committee. We wanted to make sure that the work of the Equity Committee got brought forward, and Monique has a great lens to that, as she's been on it from day one, and then also Dr. Hawkins. So, and sorry, I should have said Director Bankin rather than Monique. I apologize for that. So those will be the people representing the district. Any questions on the House Oversight Committee? Okay. And then the last thing that I wanted to just plant the seed for, this will have more discussion, but this is just the initial planting the seed so that you have an idea of what's going on. There's been a proposal brought to, well, it was made by and brought to some of the superintendents that the CIML, that there's kind of a realignment or reconfiguration. And if Eric, could you open that document? Judge is going to, at the next board meeting, he'll come forward and do a presentation on it. But with this new proposal, it would put Ames into, if we joined, it would put us into a Big Ten conference. And then the remaining schools would stay in the CIML conference. The reason behind this, there are many, but some of them have to do with travel time. Some of them have to do with just really trying to grow programs. Win-loss records have been difficult for many of the teams that are being proposed into the Big Ten conference. And so this would be a way to really help build programs. And so we are waiting to see kind of where it goes, but Judge, I'm pretty sure Judge has been talking with all of the coaches. I know I see him on here tonight, but it looks like he's in the participants, or the attendees. But with that, we would need to, as a board, make a resolution. The superintendents are creating a resolution, and we would want to do that around the 1st of April. So it would give us time to discuss it some more at board meetings in March, and then potentially bring it forward for a decision late March, early April. Any questions on that?
Will there be any opportunities for community members? I don't know about a community forum, but helping community members to understand kind of some of the reasons, get an opportunity to ask some questions.
Sure.
I don't know. I'm just curious. I would imagine among athletics, this is a shift, but I don't know. Are people aware of it and providing them the opportunity to get information? I don't know what knowledge is out there.
Sure. I know Judge has made the coaches aware, or is making the coaches aware. Is Judge in now?
Yeah.
Hi.
Superintendent Reisner, I'm in. Thanks for allowing me to jump in, Eric. We've been working through this process. It's going on probably 3 or 4 months now. And the athletic directors took a stab at this, and we've been working back and forth with our conference members. The principals have had some input, and now it's getting to the point where our superintendents need to start to finalize this. But tomorrow night we have a head coaches meeting scheduled to kind of finalize where we're at with our intentions, and to continue to seek group input. We've had a lot of individual coach input, but tomorrow night we'll finish it off with group input with our coaches. And then, I will present again at the next meeting, and I have a little bit more of a formal presentation ready to go, but it sounded like we may need to look at some involvement from other stakeholders possibly.
Just a quick clarification, because I'm not super in this world. So the proposed Big Ten, that would mean that our athletes would only compete against this other 9, and not with the CIML. Is that how it goes, or do they still go?
So there's a lot of nuances to every season. Every different sport has different unique scheduling matrices from the state. Our intention is to, if we join the Big Ten conference, to predominantly play against those schools. Football, for example, that schedule is driven by the state. So that would be set off to the side, and the state would determine our schedule there. But most other sports, we would predominantly play like schools in that Big Ten conference if we get to that point, and if we decide to join that conference.
Okay, so I think I agree with Director Franson. I think then it should be beneficial to have some sort of input, just so people know, because they're different sports. Like you said, some people, like me, I thought that we only would play this for every sport, and I guess that's not the case. So I think clarification for that. And I think I would be interested to know for the future presentation, what led to this decision?
Sure. Yeah, and that's good input to take in tonight, and we will take that next step to be, officially in a presentable mode at the next meeting tonight. Like Superintendent Reisner said, she's just planting the seed that's coming at us, and tonight's a start to discuss that.
I just found out about it midweek last week, so I wanted to bring it to the board as quickly as I could, so that the board had it on their radar, knowing that we needed additional discussion moving forward.
So, Judge, I have one question. First, I've got to get over the shock of the little Cyclones playing in the Big Ten. That has a feel to me that I don't like. I'm sure Jeff loves it, but we'll ignore Jeff. When you come to with that information, like Director Colton said, I'd be interested to know what the general student population counts are for the different schools, because I'm thinking this might bring Ames more in line to schools similar in size, which could be a justification as well, or some background that might be interesting.
Sure, that's part of what we call the BEDS document. And that's been part of this fact finding to help us with that. But we'll bring that forward as well.
Thank you.
I think that was my last item.
Okay, good. I couldn't remember. All right, the board planning calendar. And as far as I know, there are no changes to this from last time. Is that correct?
The only change would be just the, we already talked about the April 12th meeting is a change, and then then we'll have that closed session this week.
Any questions from the board on the board planning calendar? Okay, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move we adjourn.
Second.
Moved by Beerbaum, seconded by Perez. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0.
See everybody later.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good